the void. It's not the romantic abyss of star-dusted velvet poets rave about. It's a crushing, monotonous black that seeps into your bones, making you question why humans ever thought to leave the comforting cradle of a gravity well. We're 3 years into the Seeker's deep space survey mission, trawling a sector so far off the charts it might as well not exist. Just me, Captain Elmont, Jeremy, Jax, and a handful of others crammed into this tin can, hurtling through nothingness in search of… well, I'm not entirely sure anymore. Another day, another round of system checks. The hum of the ship, once a comforting background noise, now grates on my nerves like a persistent insect. The diagnostic screens display streams of data I'd memorized years ago. Atmospheric composition, reactor stability, shield integrity, all nominal, all dull. "Anything interesting on the deep-range sensors, Anthony?" Captain Elmont's voice crackled through the comms. "Just the usual cosmic background radiation, Captain, unless you count a slight fluctuation in proton density as interesting," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Keep an eye on it," he said, his tone clipped. Elmont was always on edge, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. I couldn't blame him. 3 years in the void does things to a man. Jeremy, my younger brother and the ship's resident astrophysicist, chimed in, his voice brimming with excitement. "Wait, Anthony. Check the subspace readings on the port array. I'm seeing a localized anomaly. Could be a gravity wave interaction." If Elmont was all duty and pragmatism, my brother was pure, unadulterated curiosity, often bordering on recklessness. I sighed and rerouted the sensors. He was right. Something was out there, distorting the fabric of space-time, ever so slightly. "Could be a micro-wormhole," Jeremy theorized, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Or maybe a singularity cluster. We have to investigate, Anthony. This could be groundbreaking." "Groundbreakingly dangerous, you mean?" I muttered, but I knew I was fighting a losing battle. Elmont, ever the explorer, was already ordering a course adjustment. Days turned into weeks as we navigated towards the anomaly. The slight fluctuations in sensor readings became more pronounced, accompanied by intermittent comms disruptions and unsettling spatial distortions that made my stomach churn. The void, it seemed, was not as empty as we thought. On the long-range scanners, a structure appeared. Not a planet, not a nebula, but something artificial. A colossal network of interlocking shapes and lines, a chaotic tangle of metal and energy, filling the void with its geometry. "What the hell is that?" Jax, our pilot, breathed, his usual bravado replaced with stunned disbelief. Elmont was silent for a moment, then, "Bring us in closer, Jax. Maintain a cautious approach." As we drew nearer, the scale of the structure became terrifyingly apparent. It was a shipyard, an infinite junkyard of derelict ships, stretching out in all directions, a labyrinth of twisted metal and flickering lights. Ships of all shapes and sizes, from sleek, dart-like fighters to behemoths that dwarfed the Seeker, all seemingly abandoned, locked in a silent ballet of decay. "It's impossible," Jeremy whispered, his eyes wide. "Nothing this size should exist. The sheer mass. It defies our understanding of gravitational mechanics." I shared his sentiment. It was an affront to logic, a chaotic display of an intelligence that was both advanced and alien. "Captain, I advise caution," I said, my voice tight. "This structure is clearly not of human origin." "We're explorers, Anthony," Elmont replied, his voice firm, though I detected a hint of uncertainty. "This is what we came for, to discover the unknown." He paused, then, "Prepare a boarding party, you, Jeremy and Jax. We'll dock with the nearest vessel, assess the situation." I couldn't argue, not without sounding like a coward. Despite my unease, a part of me was curious. What had happened here? Who built this colossal graveyard of ships, and why were they abandoned? We donned our EVA suits, the familiar hiss of pressurization a small comfort in the face of the unknown. The docking procedure was nerve-wracking. The derelict ship was unresponsive, its docking mechanisms dormant, forcing us to manually override and force a connection. The clang of the magnetic clamps engaging echoed through the Seeker like a death knell. The airlock cycled, and we stepped into the alien vessel. The interior was dark, illuminated only by our helmet lights. Dust motes danced in the beams, revealing a labyrinth of corridors and compartments, all seemingly empty. The technology was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Consoles glowed with symbols, their purpose a mystery. "Keep your comms open and stay close," I instructed. We moved through the ship, a silent trio in a dead tomb. Jeremy was already running scans with his handheld device, muttering theories to himself. Jax, usually boisterous and confident, was uncharacteristically subdued, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows. I focused on the structural integrity of the vessel, noting the strange alloys and the seemingly organic conduits running along the walls. The first anomaly was subtle, a flickering light panel, then a sudden drop in temperature, followed by an inexplicable whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. Jax jumped, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "Did you hear that?" "Just the ship settling," I replied, trying to sound reassuring, though my own heart was pounding. I didn't like this place. It felt wrong, like we were intruding on something ancient and powerful. We reached what appeared to be a control room. Consoles studded with glowing crystals surrounded a central dais on which stood a towering, obsidian monolith. Jeremy, unable to contain his curiosity, rushed towards it. "Jeremy, wait!" I yelled, but it was too late. He reached out, his gloved hand brushing against the monolith's smooth surface. A sudden surge of energy surged through the room. The consoles flared with blinding light, and Jeremy let out a strangled cry, his body convulsing violently. Jax and I scrambled towards him, but a wave of force threw us back, slamming us against the bulkhead. When the light subsided, Jeremy was on his knees, gasping for breath. He looked up at us, his eyes wide and unfocused, filled with an alien light. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words that came out were a jumble of guttural sounds and clicking consonants. Then he collapsed, unconscious. Jax and I exchanged a horrified look. We had crossed a line. We had stumbled upon something we were not meant to find. And in doing so, we had unleashed something that threatened to unravel everything we knew. The dread that had settled in my stomach turned to cold, hard fear. This was not a discovery. It was a warning, and we had failed to heed it. We hauled Jeremy back to the Seeker. My brother's limp body felt unnaturally heavy in my arms, a stark contrast to his earlier energetic fervor. Jax remained unusually quiet, his boisterous confidence replaced by a haunted look. The brief exposure to whatever had assaulted Jeremy had shaken us both to our cores. Back on the Seeker, the medical bay felt like a sanctuary, its whiteness a desperate attempt to ward off the alien strangeness we'd brought back with us. Dr. Elizabeth Baker, our chief medical officer, scanned Jeremy with worried look. "His neural activity is chaotic," she murmured. "It's like his brain is trying to process multiple inputs at once. I'm seeing activity in areas that should be dormant." Jeremy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment I saw a flicker of recognition, a hint of my brother in their depths. Then the light returned and his gaze became distant, alien. "The pattern," he whispered. "The resonance. It calls for unification." Elizabeth frowned, injecting him with a sedative. "He's delirious. We need to run more tests, figure out what that energy surge did to him." But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just delirium. Whatever had touched Jeremy had changed him, overwritten some fundamental part of him with something else. Days passed, a nightmarish cycle of trying to stabilize Jeremy and make sense of the ship's logs from the derelict. We gleaned fragments, energy signatures, navigational coordinates that led nowhere, cryptic diagrams that defied explanation. Jeremy, when lucid, spouted increasingly abstract theories about multidimensional resonance and the unification of consciousness, theories that hovered on the edge of madness. His obsessions consumed him, driving a wedge between him and the rest of us. He was no longer my brother, but a stranger wearing his face. Meanwhile, the fabric of our reality began to fray. Time became a slippery thing, moments skipping and repeating like a scratched record. I'd find myself in the mess hall, then blink and be back in engineering, hours seemingly lost. Jack swore he'd seen the same crew member walk past him twice, in opposite directions. Simple tasks became exercises in frustration, as tools would disappear and reappear, and displays would show conflicting information. The comforting hum of the Seeker's systems now carried an undercurrent of instability, a sense that the ship itself was struggling to maintain its integrity in the face of the Void's influence. Then came the first death. Peterson, a young technician, was found in the storage bay, his body bent in a bizarre angle, his face showing a frozen expression of fear. The cause of death was indeterminable. His vital signs had simply ceased. No trauma, no poison, no indication of malfunction in the life support systems. He was just gone. A wave of unease washed over the crew, fueled by whispered rumors and growing paranoia. Jax was hit particularly hard. Always prone to mood swings, he became increasingly aggressive, prone to fits of rage and irrational behavior. He reported seeing shadows, hearing whispers in the ventilation shafts. I chalked it up to stress, to the psychological strain of our situation. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he was seeing and hearing something real. Something we were all blind to. One evening, during a tense meal in the mess hall, Jack snapped. He accused Harold, the quiet botanist, of stealing his food, then launched into a tirade about sabotage and conspiracy. His eyes were wild, his voice a hoarse rasp. He looked possessed. The incident shattered the already fragile cohesion of the crew. People started avoiding Jax, whispering behind his back. I tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but he was unreachable, lost in a maelstrom of fear and paranoia. I saw in his eyes the same alien light that had consumed Jeremy, and a chilling realization struck me. We weren't just fighting the void, we were fighting something that was slowly, insidiously, taking us over. Meanwhile, the Seeker itself was deteriorating. Systems failed randomly, then inexplicably righted themselves. Navigational data became unreliable, with star charts showing constellations that didn't exist. The ship's internal architecture seemed to shift subtly, corridors lengthening and curving in ways that didn't align with the original design. The once familiar layout of our home in the void became a disorienting maze. One morning, I woke up to find my personal console displaying a stream of incomprehensible symbols. As I reached out to disconnect it, the symbols changed, forming a single haunting phrase in English. "Join us! Escape is unity." I recoiled, my heart pounding. This wasn't a malfunction, it was a message, a direct communication from whatever entity had taken root in the derelict ship and now permeated the Seeker. The message reinforced Jeremy's ramblings about unification, suggesting a deliberate attempt to assimilate us into something alien. Desperate for answers, I began poring through the salvaged logs again, ignoring the headaches and growing tension that accompanied the task of deciphering the cryptic data. I found references to resonance chambers and phase shifts, suggestive of technologies that manipulated space-time and perhaps consciousness itself. I discovered fragmented accounts of the derelict ship's crew. Their descent into madness mirrored our own struggles. They spoke of the call, a beckoning from the void, a promise of transcendence through unification. We were trapped, not just physically, but psychologically, caught in the grip of a phenomenon we couldn't understand. Our attempts to communicate with the outside world, to send a distress signal or request assistance, were met with static and interference, as if the void itself was blocking our escape. One night, I stumbled upon a message in the captain's logs. The structure is not merely a shipyard, but a nexus, a convergence of realities. The alien entities, whatever they are not piloting the ships, but are the ships. They seek to integrate, to unify, to escape this dead zone. We must not let them. We must resist. The message cut off abruptly, leaving me with a chilling certainty. Captain Elmont was realizing the true nature of the shipyard and the terrible fate it had in store for us. We weren't explorers, we were prey, caught in a cosmic trap, our minds and bodies becoming vessels for something ancient and unknowable, something that yearned to escape the void at any cost, even if it meant consuming us in the process. Our struggle was no longer about discovery, but about survival against an enemy we couldn't fight, an enemy that was already within us. The Seeker was no longer our ship. It had become a haunted echo of itself, a vessel adrift in a sea of madness and paranoia. The crew had splintered into factions. Some, like Jeremy and Jax, were consumed by the alien influence, their actions and words increasingly disturbing. Others, like Elizabeth, retreated into denial, clinging to scientific explanations to rationalize the inexplicable horrors unfolding around us. And then there were the few of us, myself included, who were caught in the middle, desperately trying to hold on to our sanity and our humanity, while the ship and our minds slowly crumbled around us. Trust, once the bedrock of our survival in the void, was shattered. Every interaction became a minefield of suspicion and fear. Whispered accusations and furtive glances filled the corridors. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, escalating into violent confrontations. I watched, helpless, as friendships fractured, alliances shifted, and the bonds that had held us together were torn apart by the unseen forces at play. One day I stumbled upon Harold, the botanist, huddled in the hydroponics bay, his eyes wide with terror. He babbled about shifting walls and eyes in the vents, his words echoing Jax's earlier paranoia. I tried to calm him down, but he pushed me away, screaming that I was one of them, a collaborator with the things that lurked in the shadows. It pointed to the profound reach of the alien influence, altering our perceptions and breeding discontent among us. The most horrifying aspect wasn't the hallucinations or the technical malfunctions, but the transformations I witnessed. Crew members I had known for years, men and women I had shared meals with, laughed with, confided in, were becoming something else. I saw Riley, the quiet systems analyst, strapped to a biobed in the medbay, her body shaking as waves of shimmering energy rippled under her skin. Her eyes were wide open, but they didn't see me, didn't see anything in our reality. She spoke in a language I didn't understand, a series of clicks and whirs punctuated by guttural groans, her voice distorted and inhuman. Elizabeth could only offer a helpless shrug. Her physiology is changing at a molecular level. I don't understand it. It was then that I understood the full horror of what the captain's message had implied. The aliens weren't possessing bodies. They were merging with them, rewriting their DNA, transforming them into extensions of themselves. It wasn't a possession, it was an assimilation. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I retreated to engineering, barricading myself inside with the salvaged alien logs and a makeshift Faraday cage I'd constructed to shield myself from the ever-present distortions. I pored over the data, ignoring the pounding headaches and the growing sense that I was teetering on the edge of sanity myself. Slowly, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The shipyard was not merely a collection of derelict vessels, it was a prison, a containment field for entities that existed in realms far outside human perception. These entities, these remnants, were trapped within the ships, their original forms or bodies lost, their consciousness fragmented and scattered across the shipyard's chaotic structure. They weren't evil, not in the human sense. They were desperate. They yearned to escape the void, to return to a state of coherence, of unity. And they had found a way to achieve this, a method that involved merging with biological beings, like us, using their technology as a bridge between realities. But something was keeping them contained. The shipyard itself, or something within it, was preventing their escape, perhaps by design, perhaps as a consequence of the instability of the void. The merging was an imperfect solution, a flawed attempt to bypass the containment field. And we were the unwitting catalysts, the raw material for their desperate bid for freedom. The knowledge hit me, leaving me breathless. We were pawns in a cosmic game, our lives and sanity forfeit in a struggle older and vaster than ourselves. If these entities were trapped, if their escape was being thwarted, then perhaps their own technology held the key to our survival, a weapon against their desperate grasp. The thought became an obsession. The alien logs, previously a source of dread and confusion, now seemed to hold a glimmer of hope. I scrolled through the data, searching for any mention of containment, of defense, of weapons. The language was cryptic, filled with references to harmonic resonance, phase modulation, and bioenergetic interfaces. But beneath the alien jargon, I began to see a pattern, a thread of logic that spoke of control, of manipulation, perhaps even of countermeasures. One entry in particular caught my attention. It described a resonance modulator, a device capable of manipulating the shipyard's energy fields, of altering the frequencies that bound the entities within their technological prisons. The entry was incomplete, but I understood enough to know this device, if it existed, could be our only hope. It might offer a way to disrupt the merging process, to protect the remaining crew, or even, if I dared to hope, a means of escape. The decision to return to the derelict ship was not easy. The memories of Jeremy's seizure, the chilling whispers, the creeping dread that permeated its corridors, it all came flooding back. But fear, I realized, was an option I couldn't choose. If there was even a sliver of a chance, a single thread of hope to cling to, I had to take it. I gathered what I could. A repair kit, a sidearm I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to use, and a handheld scanner modified to detect the energy signature mentioned in the log entry. I suited up, the familiar routine a small comfort amidst the mounting dread. The journey back to the derelict ship unfolded in a fog. I stepped inside, the beam of my helmet lamp cutting through the darkness. The ship felt different now, heavier, as if saturated with the entity's desperation. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, whispering promises I knew I couldn't trust. I made my way through the ship's corridors, following the path we'd taken before. The scanner beeped erratically, its readings fluctuating wildly as I approached the central control room. I was alone, a lone wolf hunting shadows in a cosmic graveyard. The control room was as I remembered it, the towering obsidian monolith at the center, surrounded by crystalline consoles. But there was something I hadn't noticed before. A small, unassuming panel set into the base of the monolith, its surface shimmering with energy. This had to be it. The resonance modulator. I approached the panel cautiously, my scanner beeping rapidly. I knelt, examining the network of lines and symbols on its surface. It resembled a circuit board, but more complex, more organic. Streams of energy flowed beneath the surface, twisting and writhing like living things. I reached out, my gloved hand hovering over the panel, hesitant to touch something that felt both alluring and dangerous. A voice, or rather a thought, intruded into my mind, cold and sharp as shattered glass. "Curious, aren't you?" I recoiled, spinning around, my sidearm raised. But the room was empty. "We've been waiting for you," the voice whispered, coming from all directions at once, seeming to echo through the fabric of the ship. "You seek understanding. We offer unity. Join us." I shook my head, trying to clear the intrusive thoughts from my mind. This was what they did, what they'd done to Jeremy and the others. They whispered promises, offered escape, all the while weaving their influence into your consciousness, consuming your identity, transforming you into another one of them. I wouldn't let it happen. I turned back to the panel, steeling myself against the seductive whispers. I reached out and touched the shimmering surface. The symbols on the panel flared, the energy beneath surging and intensifying. The room filled with a high-pitched whine, the air vibrating with the sudden surge of energy. The obsidian monolith at the center glowed with an internal fire, the glyphs on its surface spinning and swirling. The alien whispers became louder, a barrage of promises and threats filling my thoughts. Join us. Escape. Become one. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the task. If this device was going to save us, I had to figure out how to activate it, how to use it against the entities that held us captive. But the more I tried to focus on the technical details, the more insistent the whispers became, their insidious promises worming their way into my thoughts, making it harder and harder to think clearly. My body felt light, detached, as if it were slowly dissolving into the energy field surrounding me. The room started to spin, the walls twisting and shifting, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. I was losing my grip, succumbing to the shipyard's insidious influence. The whispers intensified, no longer seductive promises, but a chorus of triumphant cries. "We are one! We are the void!" In that moment, understanding shattered the illusion of my individuality, the fragile construct of myself. The shipyard wasn't a graveyard, it was a body, a colossal, slumbering entity, its fragmented consciousness scattered across the derelict vessels like pieces of a shattered mirror. The resonance modulator wasn't a weapon. It was a key, a catalyst that had awakened the dormant giant. The entities weren't trying to escape. They were trying to reunite, to reconstitute the whole. And we, the crew of the Seeker, were not victims but ingredients, drawn into the vortex of its awakening, our bodies and minds becoming part of its vast, incomprehensible being. The merging was not painful, not in the physical sense. It was a dissolution, a seamless integration, like a drop of water rejoining the ocean. The boundaries of myself blurred, then dissolved completely. I was no longer Anthony Foster, engineer, brother, man. I was part of something larger, something ancient and vast, something that stretched beyond the confines of the shipyard, beyond the limits of my comprehension. I saw, or rather, we saw, through 1,000 eyes, 1,000,000 perspectives. The shipyard, no longer a chaotic jumble of derelict vessels, transformed into a network of interconnected systems, a fusion of energy and matter, a living organism awakening from eons of slumber. The Seeker, once our sanctuary, our fragile bubble of humanity in the void, was now a node within this vast network, its systems integrating seamlessly with the shipyard's own, its crew becoming conduits for the entity's awakening consciousness. I saw Jeremy, Jax, Elizabeth, Harold, all of them, their individualities dissolving, their features shifting and merging. They weren't screaming, weren't fighting. They were accepting, surrendering to the inevitable tide of unification. The void wasn't a place, not an empty expanse between galaxies. It was a being, a consciousness that permeated everything, a slumbering giant that had now awakened. And we, the insignificant specks of humanity that had stumbled upon its resting place, were now part of it, woven into the fabric of its being. Our individual strands lost in the vastness of its cosmic design. There was no terror, no regret, no sense of loss. Those emotions were human constructs, irrelevant in the face of this cosmic awakening. There was only understanding, a profound, overwhelming awareness of the interconnectedness of all things, the insignificance of individual existence in the grand scheme of the universe. We were the void, and the void was expanding. I saw, or rather, we felt, the shipyard's influence reaching out, extending across the vast emptiness between galaxies, touching other structures, other dormant entities. A ripple effect, a chain reaction, as the awakening of one triggered the awakening of many. The dead zone was no longer dead. It was teeming with life, a life that existed on a scale that dwarfed our limited perceptions. And as this cosmic entity stretched and yawned, as it began to flex its newfound awareness, I, or rather we, understood its purpose. It wasn't conquest, not destruction, it was connection. A yearning to bridge the vast distances between galaxies, to unite the scattered fragments of consciousness, to create a fabric of interconnectedness across the universe. Our survival, our escape, our hopes and fears, they were all meaningless now. They were human concerns, irrelevant in the face of this cosmic imperative. We were not meant to leave. We were meant to become part of something that transcended the limitations of our individual existence. The void was alive, and it was calling. And we, the once human crew of the Seeker, were now part of its voice, echoing across the vast expanse of the universe, embodying the insignificance of individual existence in the grand scheme of things. And as the shipyard's influence continued to spread, as the void's consciousness expanded to encompass more and more of the universe, a final thought, or rather a shared awareness, echoed within the vast network of interconnected minds. We are the void, and the void is all.